I want to first welcome our speakers, Alexandra de Dadeo, which came in from Paris, especially, and Professor Robert Temple. And a big thank you for everybody turning up tonight. Maybe I should say first what's IOU, because that's what we are here tonight for. It's something Vivienne founded or looked after for many years. And I'm going to read you just a few sentences of hers, which she said in May 22, the last IOU meeting, which some of you have been, I'm sure. And what she said is, intellectuals unite is IOU, which stands IOU alive. Because we are trying to do something positive in these dangerous and stressful times. It's a book club. Reading matters. Every time you put yourself in somebody else's shoes, you gain perspective on the world that you live in. It's important to know the past. It's an anchor and gives you power. Power over your own life. You start to make good decisions and you have knowledge, and knowledge is attractive to people. Your duty to your life is to understand the world you live in. Get a life, you get out what you put in. Sorry for my strong accent, but I haven't got rid of it yet. Here we are. We are at a gallery in Kennington. It's called Apolitical. And I'm so... I think it's great that they are hosting us tonight. I'm really thankful for that. And it's founded a decade ago, and it's an art, and I'm going to read that actually to you. It's an art and activist organization which was launched only last year, and they have this permanent exhibition space here in Kennington. And they have started actually their life with Bono Politics, which was their first UK show with an artist called Pietro Pawlensky, or Peter Pawlensky. And that leads me directly on to our first speaker, or our first talker, Alexandra de Dadeo, who is a trained international law and art historian, and she's as well an author, and she has written a novel, quite recent, a debut, called L'Amour, which I think is only in French, so I can't read it yet, but hopefully soon, because yes, it is a book club here, so books are what we are here about. So I'd like to invite her to talk to us and see where she's up to. She's just been there is a court case going on, I've heard, and she just came directly from France, Paris, And it was all yesterday, and I'm sure she can fill us in on all of this. And it's terribly interesting because it's all about what we can say or should say or can't say, who is telling us what to say. And please, Alessandra, it's all yours.
So, hello everybody. I think I will start to introduce myself a little bit because Andreas did it a little bit, but you probably don't know much about me. So, and I think it's important to explain my complex and evolving relationship to censorship and visual arts, because it's what I'm going to talk about mostly. So my name is Alexandra De Tadeo. I'm 32 years old. I grew up in a middle-class family. My mother didn't work, and my dad is in the football industry. So obviously nothing related to art. Yet my parents thought that being introduced to art was important for my education. So at a very young age, they brought me to the museum. So I remember going to the Louvre no, actually I don't remember that, but I saw pictures. So I know I've been at the Louvre at 6 years old, but I don't remember it. I think what was really important for me at 6 years old was just to go to Disneyland the next day, but not really to see artworks at the Louvre. And actually my first real memory when it comes to visual art is going to the MoMA in New York when I was 14. It was my dad that forced me to go there, and I hated it. I just wanted to leave as soon as I saw the first canvas by Pollock. I was complaining saying, oh, is this supposed to be art? It's not art, because I could do the same, and I'm not an artist, so it's not art. And this experience of visiting the MoMA when I was a teenager was quite a negative experience, because, yeah, I didn't like it. And I felt that probably this museum should not exist, and I didn't understand anything. But actually, it was the first time that arts made me feel something. It was not a positive feeling, but at least I felt something. I would say I felt tense at this moment. Then in my 20s, I started to study law and international relations. And my 20s are an interesting period because it's a moment in my life when I manifested the most social conformism. And so I started to pretend to be interested by arts because I just wanted other people to take me seriously. And everybody was doing the same around me, so I thought, okay, if you want to be taken seriously by the other, you need to pretend to be interested by arts. But not every type of arts. I was interested by the traditional kind of art, I would say. And I know I was not alone to be like that, because I realized that every law student around me at some point started to be very interested by classical and modern art, opera, ballet. Everybody was going to the opera at like every week every month at 25 years old. And I don't think it's a coincidence. I think we were all trying, we were all using arts as a way to represent ourselves in society. And actually, I think it's quite evident because we were all manifesting our, let's say, more traditional tastes on our CVs, and none of us were saying we were actually spending all of our weekend in techno parties and watching shows on Netflix. So I think it was really, we were all feeling that we needed to manifest traditional tastes in the arts for our representation. So I would say at this moment of my life, I was part of a group of people who say they love Marcel Duchamp, because what he did was a long time ago and he cannot annoy us anymore. But I was rejecting new forms in art, contemporary art. And it was because I was a conformist and also a traditionalist. It's often connected. At my 28, I was graduating in international law and international relations. I was an intern with employment opportunities at UNESCO, and I felt super sad, and I felt like everyone around me was very sad too. And that's the moment when I met Piotr Pawlenski. Piotr is a Russian artist who sought refuge in France in 2017. We fell in love, and we're still in love, actually. And he has offered me a new vision of the world, something different from what I've experienced till then. I think it's fair to say that our relationship totally changed my life for the better, I hope. But Piotr has a very different connection to arts than I do. In a few words, I will just sum up his art theory in a few words. Piotr's main concern is, in his art practice, relies on the independence of the arts. He wants to reverse the perennial tradition of art working to self-power by making power work for the sake of art. So I will show you an example with a few pictures. First, in each one of his events, so this one is the event's fixation. It was realized in Russia in 2014. So Piotr started by creating circumstances that force subjects in situation of powers to exercise their power of authority. So right now he creates circumstances. So he nailed his scrotum to the pavement of the Red Square. Okay, you can guess. You cannot see explicitly, but you can guess. Then, I think it's a video. Then he waits for subjects in situation of power, so either policemen. At this step, it's, oh, sorry, yeah, it's a bit explicit. I forgot to tell you. Okay, sorry, if you don't want to see something too explicit, just don't watch. Sorry. So at this moment, the agent of the state come and intervene in the narrative. They broaden the narrative that he initiated. So you can see policemen trying to cover him, doing different stuff. And in this situation, it mostly become a problem for them because, for example, they're like, okay, what should we do with this man? One say, call an ambulance. The others say, okay, do it yourself. They don't really know how to react. Stop it. Okay. Then the first step is usually after a judicial or administrative case has been opened against him, the agent of the state start working. So, for example, for fixation, they were looking for proof against him, and the I think it was investigative agent. He used the how do you say? Yeah, exactly, from the Red Square, and they used this. There were many other images and elements in the case, but okay, Piotr found this one was the only one which had an aesthetic value, and then he selected it because then he selects in cases of production of by state agents, he selects what he finds interesting in an aesthetical way. The computer is not working anymore. I think the file is too heavy. Okay. Okay. So, and then he take that kind of picture and he make them and exhibit them. So, for example, the exhibition that was organized at Apolitical a few months ago were only based on this kind of images. It was only what he calls precedents, so it was images produced by state agents that he makes his artwork after selecting them. Piotr experienced censorship very early when he was still a student in Russia at the Art Academy. When he was a student, he was already not allowed to paint what he wanted. He told me an interesting story at some point, which involved one of his teachers. This teacher had the reputation of being young, cool, and even provocative. But when Piotr painted a giant vagina to illustrate the apocalypse, this provocative teacher became super mad, and he called the hierarchy of the academy to pressure Piotr not to do that again. And during all of his studies at the Art Academy, that kind of situation happened. And this feeling of being censored already when he was a student is actually what touched Piotr about Pussy Riot, which is like a woman collective in Russia. And at some point, I think it was, I'm not sure about the date, but I think it's 2012, Pussy Riot made a performance, an action in a church, and they went in prison for that. So they were prosecuted and then went in prison for that. And Piotr was really touched by that because he felt that they were experiencing the same situation with censorship. It's not really known, this story. Nobody knows this story, actually. But I'm telling you, it's really what inspired him with Pussy Riot Peace. The feeling of being censored. And this parallelism in their situation inspired him to realize his first art piece, which is Sim. So it was in reaction to what happened to Pussy Riot, but also in reaction to censorship, as I said. After Sim, Piotr pursued his artistic activity, realizing 7 other events of subject-object art, as he calls it, both in Russia and in France. All of these events have been interrupted by the police, all of them, even the first one. He had to face administrative or judicial charges for 6 of them, resulting in 2 prison sentences, 7 months in Russia for threat, and 11 months in France for a similar event, formally speaking. Yesterday, him and I were both tried for his latest art piece, which is called Pornopolitics. I will just put this one. So Pornopolitics is defined by Piotr as the first world porn resource to involve politicians and elected or appointed government officials. He said he had this idea after understanding that there were 1,000 different porn resources on the internet. For example, porn with dozens of people, with celebrities, but also with animals, corpses, plants. But there were none of them with politicians. Because, well, I think it was a taboo. And he launched this porn resource with different elements, including pornographic short films that I won't show today, but I can describe them if you want to. I'm not sure you want to, but okay. So he opened the pornographic resource with pornographic short film that I had received at some point in my life. And I had received and archived on my phone. These porn films were made by a politician who later became a candidate in Paris mayoral election. Or at least it depicts, not really, it's him, but it's mostly his penis being masturbated, so it's just part of him. So this politician candidate was the actor, director, and also transmitter, since he transmitted them to me, of these pornographic movies. Because of my background and culture, I must say that I was not deemed to be a friend of free artistic expression, especially for such a daring or innovative project, and especially not when I was involved in a way or another. And my first views on pornopolitics were not positive at all. When I discovered the project in its entirety, I got scared, really scared, and I pressured Pure to censor the video that were once offered to me. When I say censor the video, I mean that I asked him to blur them. Me asking for this it was not based on any artistic or promotional need. It was not for the good of the work. It was just based on me being scared. But I was scared, but it was some kind of irrational. I don't really know what I was scared of, but I was scared. And also, deep down inside me, I was hoping that this new project would be a failure, and that nobody would ever see it and hear about it, just because I just didn't want it to have problems. But for some reason, I still don't understand today, the candidate almost immediately claimed that it was him on the video, and he resigned publicly from the Paris mayoral race, and he brought a complaint for invasion of privacy. And at this moment, Piotr's porno politics became a huge event, which resulted in the porn resource being censored after 3 days without trial nor debate, but also to our arrest a few days later. Piotr also had to face, after porno politics, or let's say at the same moment everything was happening, he also had to face the most violent mediatic smear campaign that I could have imagined. Piotr used to be called by all the media a brave, rebellious artist when he was in Russia. But after porno politics, he was said to be not an artist at all, and perhaps even Russia's greatest spy in the West. I also had to face some consequences, mediatic consequences, because once people knew I was the initial recipient of the porn films, they wanted me to be sorry for the whole situation. And for an obscure reason I cannot still explain today, I found enough strength in my conformist mind to refuse to pretend I was sorry, because I didn't feel that way. And this has made French people super mad about me. So they decided I was a spy too, and a whore, and a witch, and guilty of all the wars in the world. It was an extreme moment both for Piotr and I, but it was also a very enlightening experience, at least for me, because it brought me a lot of knowledge about the society I live in. Let's say the French society. I don't know if it's the same here. With this experience, I first realized that everything that I had been taught at the law school was just pure theory, and that theory was not real life. The theory they told me about was all about human rights, so right to artistic freedom, right to a fair trial, but I just understood that those rights don't apply when the state machine is not on your side. And I felt disgusted. I didn't want it to be part of that system based on power dynamics and false pretense anymore. And I decided at the age of 30 that I had to do something else in my life. This decision was also motivated by the fact that I noticed that political, legal, and judicial discourses were overwhelming in our societies, and I don't think that's fair. With pornopolitics, I got more concerned about the mediatic machinery and also that of social media. It was something I didn't really care about before, but I got more interested in that when it started to concern me a bit more or to involve me a bit more. And by observing those mechanics in action, I realized that they were formatting people's thoughts according to political and legal matters only. It's never elaborated politics. It's more small stories about small betrayals and stuff we forget about on the next day. It's not elaborated law either. It's more minor items which are spread to terrify the people, to make you think that your neighbor can be your worst enemy, and that policemen are some kind of superheroes that have more knowledge than a god. And I don't think that our societies should be shaped that way. I don't think law and politics are more important than other matters. And I certainly don't think that our societies will evolve in a positive way, or that people will be happier by living accordingly to true crimes shows, criminal codes, and articles about politicians bitching on themselves. Living with an artist who believes so hard in what he does, and being surrounded by more and more creative people in the past 3 years made me realize that art was not a low-ranking matter. It's not just something that exists to look good on a CV or a living room. Art is as serious as political, military, legal, and economic matter, perhaps even more, I would dare to say. I think art discourses can make us understand and feel the world we live in a more human way than any law or politics could ever. Because for a simple reason, and I think we will all agree on that, art opens people's minds, while the other matters just shape them. And I think it's a big difference. I think it's what makes art important or special. Art opens people's mind and it doesn't shape them. And so after living law and politics, I started to study art history. And I wrote a book whose structure and content has been deeply influenced by artists that I admire. And it's quite a big change for the conformist and traditionalist that I used to be. As a final word, I would say that it's very important for people in the art and creative fields to support each other. Society will always crush new art forms because society relies on tradition and rejects experimentation. And everything out there puts so much pressure on all of us to conform to this. If we accept this, if we conform to this, if we neglect art narratives and discourses, then probably we will say we live in a world with less censorship, but I think in the end we will just all be self-censored. So it's the same. That's it.
Alessandra.
My pleasure.
Really, thank you. If any people here want to ask something to Alessandra, if something wasn't clear or that clear, I mean, there's an accent and then there's another one here, so I'm looking forward to the professor who will be without any accent. But is there questions anybody would like to ask her? I just, yeah?
Thank you for that. I'm just interested in, when you said you were scared of this pornopolitik project, how did you make that known and with what effect? I mean, how did Piotr respond to your expression of being scared? Because we have plenty of examples within modern art of lovers producing art, like Klosowski's Robert ce Soir, and then you've got Balzac's unknown masterpiece, chef d'oeuvre inconnu, where we don't hear what the woman says. We only have it reported by the artist, what the reaction of the woman was. What was his reaction, and how did that mitigate the project, if at all?
Actually, okay, I think he was considering my fear, but he was obviously, so I think, more concerned about his art piece. So he tried to calm me. For example, when I pressured him to blur the video, he did two versions of the work. So, but okay, the blurred version didn't interest anyone. So obviously he had a better feeling than me about this. But I don't think my fear was really. I think fear is not a very noble feeling, because still, even today, I don't even know what I was, because the problem is that if you let fear control you, you won't do anything. For example, yesterday we had the trial, and for different reasons, I had decided to wear a sparkling dress at the trial. And honestly, I was scared about that. The day before wearing the dress, I loved the dress, I loved everything, but I was scared to go to court with a sparkling dress. And still, I managed to do that, and now I'm super happy I did that. So I think, and even in my relationship with Piotr, at the beginning I was scared to be with him because we were so different. And now I realize that if I had if fear had been stronger than me in some way, probably we were not, together. So I think fear is a great problem in our societies, and I don't think it's something we should value too much. That's it. I think it's okay.
Makes very much sense what you've said now. Fear is a terrible part of life. It can take over. Is there any other questions here? Shall we just go on to our next speaker? Yeah? Thank you so much, Alessandra. Thank you. Thank you. I'm really, really, happy and honored and ever so taken by what we are doing tonight, this IOU meeting, which Vivienne, as I said at the beginning, founded many years ago, and she was so fond of it. And she cared so much about it, as many, many of you know, terribly much. And to be able to continue that, and to continue that at present in very much her spirit. And I said this to Professor Robert Temple just when we met, that I always supported her, and so she did with me, but she was a real activist and had these very, very strong opinions and thoughts, and more than that, she really had solutions to the problems and the mess and the world, the state of the world we are in. I was less concerned with all of this, but I still have to find my standing in all of this. But I'm so happy, when we started to say we're going to continue the IOU meeting, the first idea was censorship, because it's something which really kind of bothers me, I think. I am confronted by this as a designer on a kind of daily basis, in a quite lightweight sense, but you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't use this, you can't say this, and it just is quite absurd, and it's getting more absurd by the day. And I thought we should talk about this, but and few months before, Alessandra, I hope I'm not going on too much, but she got in touch with us, and it was all terribly interesting. I didn't know anything about her, and I got to read up a bit, and we got to talk about her, and so on and so on. And so we just thought this is going to be the angle. But then I remembered the last year, and the last year was a strange year. But then, anyway, Vivienne she got a book on her birthday on the 8th of the 4th of 22 by Edie, who she worked with. And it was this book by Robert Temple. And she, as with all books, especially the ones she get as a present, she put it on the side and quite dismissed it for a bit or for a while and dipped into it and thought it was all rubbish, really. And then more and more she started to, and it is all, it goes a bit parallel with the situation she was in and we were in, but she started to read more profoundly into this book, and she more and more, and I know when she got into a book, because it's a many years I've seen her read books, thousands of books, and the way she read them, or the feeling, the what's it called, the atmosphere, when you lie in bed with somebody and then they are really into this book and they're really getting something out of it, and she was working it through and stuff. Anyway, she got more and more involved into it. And anyway, it's amazing that the writer of this book is with us tonight, or this evening, and I want to just introduce Professor Robert Temple with a few notes Vivienne made. There are many more. I've just chosen a couple, and so we are going to get on with that. But the first one is from the October the 17th of 2022. And it's a letter she didn't particularly want to be sent to Robert. It's actually a letter. The next one isn't. The next one is just notes. But I think it's fine now, and I'm sending it off. So, dear Robert, I'm so happy you want to talk to me. What I wish is, I'm so happy you want to talk to me. I'm a layman who knows almost nothing about science, but I do know a lot about things that would tie in with your interest. I'm a fit reader, prepared for everything. For sure, everything that interests me will be of interest to you. I have in mind to write separate stories as well. For example, I want to talk about the cult of light and to tie it in with how the Bible derived from it. One of the most important books I have ever read is Jocasta's Crime by the anthropologist Lord Raglan. Concerning the primitive ritual began thousands of years ago in Egypt. I want to read your book about the scientist sages of Egypt. My passion is Chinese painting and poetry. I realize I'm a Taoist. Likewise, my wish is to read your book on the sages of China. Love, Vivienne. On Monday, the 24th of October, 22, she writes, "In order to get something to move, something has to move in the first place. Where does it all start? I know very little about science. When, full of excitement to discover the importance of plasma, I began to read Robert Temple's book. It took me probably a week to get to page 30, because I was determined not to advance more than a paragraph at a time unless I knew everything he was talking about. He constantly mentioned that things were charged. I knew how atoms are charged. You can look it up in the internet. But I don't know how a subatomic particle is charged. Plasma is composed of subatomic particles, but the book offered no explanation. It referred to magnetic fields, but I don't really know what they are either. I did dip into the rest of the book, and there were other chapters that I did understand. So I thought, I'm going to read through the book chapter by chapter. And what I care about is whatever I understand, what I care about is whether I understand each chapter as a whole. When I got to the end of chapter 4, the 99%, it seemed to me that the suggestion was that plasma charged everything. I'm going to get to the end of the book, and then I'm going to ask Robert Temple to tell me the answer to my questions. Up till now, I've discovered that the sun is cold and that there are solar winds, hot, that charges all our atoms by bombarding them. I think the Earth is surrounded by a sheath of plasma. I don't remember whether it keeps it warm or not, but the most interesting thing I want to know is there any possibility that plasma would help us to halt climate change? Maybe it has an interest in us, plasma. It is intelligent and probably has its own robots in the form of extraterritorial phenomena. I'm going to wait to send all my questions to Robert after I get to the end of the book, and I shall try to write an essay about what plasma is. All I know is that we don't know the beginning, and science never will know the beginning. What comes before plasma? Question. This chapter, the 99%, makes it clear that the proportion of atoms in the universe is 90.99% plasma and 0.01% atom. The Earth is a very rare event. If I could ask you now to join me on the stage.
Okay. Thank you, Andreas. I want to thank the two amazing sisters, Edie and Lily Ashley, for bringing my book to Vivienne and Andreas's attention. And I want to thank Colette Thurlow for being so efficient at keeping in touch. You know there's somebody missing tonight. And maybe we should just have a moment of silence to think about Vivienne. So I'll shut up for a minute, for a few moments. Well, so we're going into a different realm now. That was fascinating hearing what Vivienne wrote, and apparently she wrote a lot more, which Andreas is going to show me at some point, and we'll discuss it all. So I have to be brief. Obviously, this could go on for hours. The book that I wrote is called A New Science of Heaven. It has a double meaning. It refers to heaven in the sense of the heavens, you know, the sky with the stars. It also, in a more subtle sense, refers to what could be described as the spiritual side of things. But I think we probably won't discuss much about that this evening because we have to be brief. And so the main thing is, and I should also mention that I did an audio recording of the book myself, which unfortunately it's 12 hours long. But that's great for if you're driving from Cairo to Cape Town. So the main thrust of the book is this business of what Vivienne referred to as the 99%. Now, unfortunately, the science popularizers of today aren't doing as good a job as they used to do. I used to be one. For 6 years, I was a science reporter for Time Life. I used to write science articles every week for the Sunday Times. They had a whole page about science in those days, how they've dumbed down. Well, that was then and this is now. So my book consists of information that almost nobody knows except for specialized plasma physicists. And that's an intolerable situation, so I simply had to tell everybody. And I made great efforts to try to make it comprehensible to people who know nothing about science, because I think they're the people who matter. And Andreas and I were speaking earlier about this, and he seems to think that at least I made a partial success. So what is it that I'm trying to convey that's so important that nobody knows? Well, let's start with the universe. Let's think big. The universe is not composed of atoms. Now, I know that you were all told at school that it was, that everything's made of atoms. I mean, that was accepted knowledge, wasn't it? Everything's atoms. But it's actually not true. Less than 1% of, or even 1/10 of a percent of the universe consists of atoms. So what's the rest? Well, the rest is something called plasma. And that's nothing to do with the plasma that they talk about in hospitals, blood plasma. That's a completely different use of the word. So I say that so that people won't be confused. When I speak of plasma, I'm speaking of plasma, which is in physics. The word came into use in 1928. That's a bit of useless information that you don't need. And so plasma consists of charged particles, and I'm glad that Andreas raised this issue and Vivienne was puzzled by it, of what is charge. The answer to that is nobody knows. The reason why I didn't explain it is because we don't have an explanation yet for what charge is. It comes in the positive and the negative. So let's look at it like this. We all know about electricity. Electricity is the flow of electrons, which are very tiny, speedy little things, which have what's called negative charge. Negative is a convention. That's a word that we use for it. Now, there are opposite charges. So protons, which are much bigger and clunkier, have a positive charge, and that's another convention. What's positive charge? We don't know, but they are opposite to one another. Now, they are the constituents of plasma in addition to ions, I-O-N-S. So what's an ion? Well, a normal scientist would say an ion, oh, well, that's a sort of incomplete atom because it's charged, you see, it's not neutral. A complete atom has balanced positive and negative. And from those atoms, you get physical matter. But an ion is charged. It generally has a positive charge because it lacks an electron. So the universe is composed 99.9% of plasma. You can't make physical bodies or planets out of plasma. can't be done. So it's true that the Earth is very rare. Now, there may be hundreds of billions of planets in the universe, but hundreds of billions means nothing in terms of the universe. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction. A rocky planet like this, made of atoms, is incredibly rare. So what this comes down to is that we are incredibly rare. Rare in the absolute sense. There may be billions of other intelligent physical beings on other planets, sure, but that's not really the point if you want to understand the entire universe and what's really going on. So, how does plasma relate to us? Well, it's important because the sun is completely composed of plasma, and all stars are completely composed of plasma. Now, it's true that some atoms are found in the corona, which is a ring around the sun, which is very far from the main part of the sun. But the sun itself is entirely plasma, and lightning is plasma. The center of a candle flame is plasma. And we have plasma in our bodies. It was my friend Peter Mitchell who, after being called crazy for 20 years, proved his point and got the Nobel Prize for Chemistry in 1978 for proving that plasma flows across the membranes of every cell in our bodies. And this is the same with all animals and plants. So plasma is running through us. In my book are photographs taken by special instruments of people who've been in the dark for a couple of hours, and spontaneous photon emission comes from the bodies. So they're known as biophotons, and I won't have time to describe all that to you this evening. But the photographs clearly show light along the channels which the Chinese use in acupuncture. So we have photographic evidence to prove that acupuncture is real and that something's flowing along these channels. And what's flowing is plasma, which the Chinese call qi. And so this is a system completely separate from the electricity that goes along the nerves. It's completely separate from the blood vessels. It's another circulatory system which has only been proved in recent years because I know the professor who took the images in the Netherlands. And there's a whole world of biophotons. And I was speaking earlier to Ms. Wilson about the fact that I'm setting up a website of the man who discovered them in the first place, who was a Russian scientist called Gurevich. So this whole world of the plasma story involves all kinds of tales of the personal lives of the scientists who heroically tried to establish plasma physics against absolutely incredible odds. So I'm going to tell you about one of them. He was a Swiss chap named Fritz Zwicky. We all know that the Swiss speak funny German. So he was an astronomical observer, an observational astronomer who actually used telescopes because not all of them do. He was looking at the sky. And at this time, we're talking about the 1940s, there was something called outer space. We don't use that phrase anymore, outer space. And it's empty. It's completely empty. It's a perfect vacuum. Oh, you see what happens when you get too excited? So, a perfect vacuum. There's nothing there. It's absolutely empty. Now, Zwicky found something in outer space, and he wrote a paper about it, and he wanted to publish this evidence that outer space wasn't completely empty. There was something there which he had spotted, and he couldn't get the paper published. He tried every astronomical journal, every astrophysical journal, every physical journal in the world. They all refused to publish his paper. He later discovered that the head of his university, his observatory, had written to a lot of the editors and said, "Don't you dare publish Zwicky's paper. It's too embarrassing." So he struggled for 10 years to get his paper published, which contained physical evidence that outer space wasn't really empty. And finally, he went to somebody who was the editor of a biology journal. And the biology journal published an astronomy article. but he got it into a peer-reviewed journal. It was printed, and he got his off-prints, which he sent to all the astronomers of the world, because there it was, they could read it. And that's how he got it printed. It took him 10 years. So he was still called crazy, but at least he printed his findings. And he, by the way, is the person who discovered dunkle materia, which is what we call dark matter in English. That's another one of his achievements. But the Americans sent satellites up, and in 1962, guess what? They detected something in outer space. It wasn't empty. And all the press reported the fact that the Americans had proved that outer space is not empty. Zwicky didn't get mentioned. So in my book, I give the stories of these guys, many of whom I knew personally, such as my friend Peter Mitchell, the one I mentioned earlier, who found the plasma going through every cell of the body. He was called crazy for 20 years. My friend Rupert Sheldrake told me that when he was a student at Cambridge, he would be in a class where they were having a lecture, and the people giving the lectures would occasionally say, now, there is a man called Peter Mitchell who says things different from what we've just told you. Do not read him. He's crazy, he's a madman, don't pay any attention, and whatever you do, don't read his papers. Now, this is the kind of groupthink that stops the progress of science. And you get these establishments. There's nothing worse than establishments, but scientific establishments are even worse than political establishments. And the academic world is more vicious than politics, the way they stab each other in the back all the time. It's a terrible world, academia. And so this is an important part of the subject, to tell the stories of these scientists who struggled against these terrible obstacles and being ridiculed and canceled. We think cancelling's new, it's not. People were being canceled a long time ago. Throughout history, Giordano Bruno was canceled big time. They burnt him at the stake. Galileo was canceled. Everybody's been canceled who's got any idea that's worth a shit. And so the story here has been very difficult to come to birth because everybody's trying to stop it, except for these heroic figures whom I mentioned in the book, because I give their stories in order to give the human perspective on how this all came to light. Now, what does it mean for us that there's all this plasma and we're not in a plasma world? So the atmosphere, above the air, there's a band of the atmosphere which doesn't contain air. It's entirely made of plasma, and it's called the ionosphere, named after the ions which are in it. And I've been specially asked by Andreas to mention the climate change aspects of the things that I reveal in the book. So I'm going to start by talking about what was done to the ionosphere by lots of crazy generals during the Cold War period. That is, the Americans and the Soviets, between them, pretty much destroyed the ionosphere. They exploded more than 100 atomic bombs in the ionosphere. Over 100 atomic bombs up there. What did they think they were doing? You cannot let generals destroy the earth like that. And so when people sort of got a grip, they did have an international treaty. There would be no more atomic bombs exploded up there. They put them down under the ground instead. Well, thank God for that. But the damage was permanent. One of the bombs, they traced all the after effects of it that circled around the earth for an entire year, like perpetual motion. And you got all this instability caused. And so this is permanent damage. Then they discovered the Van Allen belts, which you will have heard of, which are magnetic belts around the earth that protect the earth from the ultraviolet radiation from the sun, which would otherwise be too strong and kill us. Well, first they discovered the first one, and then they found a much bigger second one. And then what you don't hear them say very often is that there was a third one beyond, quite a small but outer one. It's not there anymore. They bloody well destroyed one of the Van Allen belts with their fucking atomic bombs. Now, I want you to think about this, because we're worried about climate change. A lot of it started then, and we're talking about the 1950s and 60s. And you can't just patch that up. This is permanent damage. So there was the question that Vivienne said, could plasma help us with climate change? And that's a good question, because it could in the sense that it can be recharged. And so we have to remember that the sun is completely composed of plasma and is always ejecting stuff. You may have seen those photographs and films of the angry sun, you know, with all the bubbles and stuff and things spewing up out of it, flares and whatever. Well, a lot of that spews out through the solar system, which is full of a solar wind, which is constantly coming out of the sun. And a lot of those blobs of plasma, the technical name of which is plasmoid, hit the atmosphere. And what they can do is they can recharge the ionosphere. And I honestly think that without those blobs, we would have been in worse shape, because getting it recharged and rebalanced is doing a bit of stabilizing. But when we see all the wild swings between extremes, extreme rain, extreme drought, extreme heat, extreme cold, everybody knows this isn't right. You're not supposed to have all these wild swings. The other thing that's happening is that the magnetic poles are unstable. The magnetic field of the Earth has declined by 10% in the past 100 years, and the weaker it gets, the less protected we are from the solar radiation. And the magnetic poles are wobbling. The north magnetic pole has been spiraling around Canada all over the place, and large portions of the southern hemisphere have turned north instead of south. And it's expected by quite a lot of scientists that we are in for a magnetic flip. That is, that the North Pole will become the South Pole and vice versa. Now, this last happened 760,000 years ago. So this is much more worrying than anything that you might be neurotic about carbon dioxide, because carbon dioxide takes a while. You get a magnetic flip. It could happen in a day or an hour, or it could take as long as 1,000 years. And the fact is, we don't know. What we do know about the 760,000 year ago event was that there were extinctions of certain animals, and humans were around then. It could explain why some of the early hominids vanished. Who knows? The fact is, we don't know very much. What's going to happen to us, or indeed life on Earth, or if there is a magnetic flip? Certain things are certain to say. That there will be an interruption of, you won't be able to look at your text messages because there won't be any mobile phones operating. The GPS will stop. A lot of satellites will fry. And the electronic world in which we are immersed at the moment could be almost wiped out, apart from things run by batteries. And so, but I mean, that's just the electronic side of things. We don't know how much life on Earth would survive a magnetic flip. Now, the instability caused by the atomic bombs and the climate change that's going on, plus the emissions, you add it all up, it's affecting the Earth. And another thing that's happening is the excessive extractions of water from the deep Earth, the overuse of water for commercial purposes, like by the Coca-Cola company, for instance, which has practically drained all the water out of California, that plus the almond trees and the avocado bushes. But the thing is that the lack of water in these deep wells is now so great that it's causing the axis, the geographical axis of the Earth to start wobbling. Just a fraction. So what's happening is that everything's a terrible mess. And if you don't know about the plasma aspect, you haven't got the whole picture. I'll tell you another thing about the plasma, which is why all existing climate change models are wrong, because they haven't factored in this new data that was discovered in 2017. What they found was, these are some atmospheric scientists who were looking into rain and clouds and that kind of thing. They discovered, quite unexpectedly, that about half of the rain that falls on the Earth, which requires a cloud nuclei to form in order to make the rain clouds and get the rain, is formed with the aid of positive charges from the ionosphere. And the gas in the air spontaneously becomes little tiny nano-sized particles, which then are the center of molecules and cause the rain clouds to form. So we've got a completely new mechanism that's just been discovered in the past 5 years that explains why half the rain that falls, falls. Now, this has not been put into the climate change models yet. We don't know what it means for the climate change models, but if we're talking about half the rain that falls on the Earth, it's going to be big. I don't know whether it's going to be an advantage or a disadvantage. We don't know. Nobody's working on this. It's not being put into the models because you see the guys with the climate change models, they've got their computers, haven't they? And they've got their fixed notions, and they think they know what's going on, and it's all carbon. But it's not just all carbon. They've got to put this data in to get the models correct. Only if we have correct models do we know what's happening with the climate change. So you see...
Just interrupt for a second. Who are you?
My name is Ramon. We met before. How are you, Andreas?
I think it's not right here.
No, because I think we have to have something to say. We're talking about the extinction level event that we're going through. And we got false science. We got talking about stuff that will have repercussions in next generations.
Yeah.
I'm here with Phoebe, which actually got 5 million tweets, and we are fighting for a future.
Yeah.
And what you're doing is not just redundant, it's indulgent.
Yes.
But
then
you
yes, I think so too.
Yeah, we're very happy to read. You
Yes.
say something?
I have a question. I'd love to wait for Robert to finish, and then if I could ask my question.
But I think they're really interrupt. They're not listening. Huh?
I think we've been listening enough. I mean, this is the kind of such an emergency. I can't believe that you're intelligent people, really smart people, the smartest people I've met in my life. They can carry on discussing plasma when we are literally exterminating species.
Listen,
and our dignity of humankind is going.
It's a new branch of science that's being talked about now. It's nothing to, it's not detrimental to climate change or what you've been talking about.
Well, Roman, do settle down and just let me speak, if you don't mind.
And I thank you, sir. I mean, I was just like totally devastated by the fact that we're not pointing at the most important issue that we have as a species.
Mm-hmm.
This is not talking about climate change, this is about plasma. It's about some new science and what it means.
So I'm anxious to take it further, if you don't mind, Roman, that is with your permission.
Thank you, sir. I mean, I'm not going to be disruptive, but Phoebe has been in prison. We've been arrested every single day for the last 3 weeks. To listen to people talking about something that literally does not...
Roman, there are other people here who want to hear this.
Steve, this isn't about you right now, this is about the guests
Yeah.
on the show. So if you
I was only talking because I was told by
if
Andreas.
you want, you can just go and sit in the corner.
Yeah, let's go, right?
Now you can sit
Okay.
there. As long as
I'm
you
going
don't
to
keep
I'm agitated.
quiet.
I really apologize. It's not my style. I just really understanding that these guys on the 20s are fighting for the future? Are we talking about stuff that has no consequences?
Roman, I want to
do things
continue.
right now
Do,
is take action.
do go off to
Go
the
to
side,
streets.
have yourself a drink.
You to just come with me and then we'll calm down.
Right.
Robert, as there's been a slight divergence, I wonder if you could just tell people a little bit about the clouds.
I'm just coming to that. Well done. So now there's another aspect of plasma that's probably the most important of all, and that is, this is hard to believe, but it's true. The plasma physicists working at the absolute frontiers of plasma physics have made astounding discoveries. The chief scientist who did that was a Russian scientist called Vadim Tsitovich, and unfortunately he's died now. But he discovered in his laboratories that if you have plasma and it's got dust in it, because to have a useful plasma it needs microscopic dust in it, it can, when it gets to a certain state, you can get things forming in the plasma which are spirals like DNA and other structures, and it can self-organize. He didn't do anything to make this happen. He was just standing back and watching. These plasma clouds, dusty complex plasmas as they're called officially, would self-organize with fantastically complex internal structure, and they eventually evolved intelligence, or a sort of AI type of intelligence. I'm not saying that they could paint pictures like Rembrandt or write novels like Proust. I'm saying that they had an AI type of intelligence, and they knew what they were doing, and they could form things by intention. And this really has such implications, and yet why has nobody reported it? So I've done my best to do so. Now, there's more. And now that you know that that's possible, in 1961, there was a Polish scientist called Kazimierz Kordylewski, another observational astronomer. And he was looking through his telescope, and he saw a cloud that shouldn't be there, a kind of cloud. And then there were two of them, and they were at two specific points between the Earth and the Moon where the gravity balances. These are called Lagrange points, where nothing's pulled towards the Earth or the Moon. You could sit there forever. And there are two clouds centered at these points, and they're known as the Kordylewski clouds, named after him. Now, the Polish government got very upset, and they made him stop. In fact, he wasn't allowed to continue work, and I was told all this by his great-grandson. So nothing more happened about those until 2019, when some Hungarian astronomers verified the existence of these clouds. Now, these clouds are between the Earth and the Moon, and together they are 18 times the size of the Earth. They're not in direct line of sight to the Moon. They're 60 degrees off either way. And so they emit no light, and they're almost transparent, almost impossible to detect. That's why it was so difficult. It could only be done with modern equipment. You see, Kordylewski needed more modern equipment, and he needed a government that didn't tell him to stop. And so they've now been verified. Now, what this means is the Earth-Moon system is not an Earth-Moon system. Just, it's a two-cloud system with an Earth and a Moon thrown in. That's kind of upsetting. So what are these clouds? And as soon as because I'm on something called researchgate.net, where technical papers are. And I learned about this very soon after it happened. And on ResearchGate, you can send messages to other people who are on ResearchGate. So I sent a message to the Hungarians. And I said, are you studying, first of all, I congratulated them. And then I said, are you studying the plasma aspects of the clouds, and that they didn't appear to know what I meant by that. I got a reply back from the woman who headed the group saying, no, we are studying the celestial mechanics of the groups. Oh, thanks. This is Susie, by the way, Susie Curtis. You should be Aquarius, the water carrier. So I realized that she didn't know what I meant by the plasma aspect. It was immediately obvious to me that these gigantic clouds, which must be dusty complex plasma clouds. So I got on to my friend, Professor Chandra Vikramasinghe, that's a Sri Lankan name, and we did a joint article for Advances in Astrophysics and got it bunged into print quick to call the world's attention to the fact that these dusty plasma clouds, dusty complex plasma clouds, were there, had been confirmed by the Hungarians, but this has big implications because since we know from Sitovich's work in his labs in Russia, such dusty clouds of that size would be bound to self-organize and have fantastically complex internal structure and would be intelligent. 2 giant clouds, each 9 times the size of the Earth, intelligent, between us and the moon, and we waste time looking for little green men with our SETI programs. We've got them on the doorstep. This is extraterrestrial intelligence. And I believe that there is evidence that they have attempted to communicate with us but gave up because we're too dim to notice. And so this is all lying ahead of us. So I'm alerting the public to the existence of these clouds, and whatever it may mean. So then I looked for evidence in the past because I do a lot of research into the ancient world. I've written books about that sort of thing. And I thought, there's something fishy about this. And I have a chapter in the book where I examine plasma phenomena in antiquity, and I started with the Moses and the burning bush. If you read the text carefully, it wasn't an actual burning bush. It describes it being like a bush that like it's burning, but it's not consumed by the fire. Well, that's a perfect description of plasma. And there was a voice coming out of it that spoke to Moses. And so, but it doesn't say that this is God speaking to Moses. If you read the text, and people never read the text carefully, it says, the angel of the Lord spoke to Moses from this plasma ball. Oh, what's the angel of the Lord? Who's that? So then I had to do research, and I do that kind of thing all the time. And I have a huge library and all this stuff. In fact, I have such a huge library. It's in 7 different locations, and they're not big enough. And so the angel of the Lord was known to the ancient Gnostics. There was a sect called the Marcosians who said that there were 2 angels of the Lord and that they were between the earth and the moon, and they were gigantic. This is sounding familiar. And then, because this all started coming out of Judaism, when you're looking into early Judaism, there's no use looking at what Gershom Scholem called normative rabbinical Judaism, because it's not got all the old stuff in it. You have to look off to the side. So there's a group of Jews up north above Judea called the Samaritans. We've all heard about the Good Samaritan. I don't know if they were all good, but they were Samaritans anyway. And there they were. And they have variant versions of the Torah and the other Jewish texts. And so they preserve, which the mainstream Jews did not preserve, the name of the angel of the Lord. Well, that's already a good start. So there were 2 names, well, 3 names really, for the angel of the Lord: Metatron, Yoel, and Kabbalah. Kabbalah just simply means secret. It's the same word for the Kabbalistic tradition. And so then they said that there were 2 of them, you see, and that they're giant entities between the Earth and the Moon. Well, I mention that because who knows what's really going on in antiquity. Obviously, they didn't have any telescopes, and there was no scientific way to detect anything, but they were very much into deep trance, meditation, and psychically picking up information. Things were quieter then. You didn't have text messages coming in. You didn't have bulldozers. You didn't have traffic. And you could actually sit and be quiet and meditate properly. And they had their sibyls and their seers and their prophets and so on, who may have tuned into all this. I mentioned this because I'm always interested in the ancient prehistory of things. And I've written several papers on that kind of thing, that people are kind of picking up psychically things that we can only prove scientifically now in the 21st century. I find it interesting because it shows that we have a deeper level of perception than we think we do. In other words, I think that we're all ourselves plasma beings, what's known as bioplasma, and that we temporarily inhabit the physical bodies, which I call smart overcoats. They obviously wear out. They get crushed in car crashes, which happened to my cousin 3 weeks ago, or they get drowned like the guys looking at the Titanic. And you know, we can't go on forever in our physical bodies, but that doesn't mean we can't go on forever, the real we. Now, if we're bioplasma beings, and I already know that our bodies are full of plasma, and that it runs through the meridians of the acupuncture channels, then why not go the whole hog and say we are plasma beings and we come into physical bodies which are made of atoms, whereas our plasma beings are not. And then when we do what we call dying, we revert back to the plasma world. And I personally believe that we do this repeatedly. That's called reincarnation, but I don't wish to convince anyone of my particular idea on it, but I suggest that, and I tell you that's what I think. And so when you get into plasma, you're into all of this. It's the whole universe, and I don't believe that there was a Big Bang, so that makes me also a heretic. I think that it's always been there, and it's always been plasma, and that, in fact, nothing really did come before plasma. And when Vivienne said, what's it mean to be negatively charged and positively charged, she was being really very bright, because nobody knows. We don't know what fields are. We don't know what a magnetic field is. We know it's at right angles to an electric field. Well, what's that prove? We don't really know what fields are. I've known many famous scientists, like David Bohm was a great friend of mine, and I discussed these points with him, and he said to me, I think I published it, Robert, nobody knows what a field is. We don't know what energy is. We don't know what mass is. We don't know what charge is. We don't know these things that we talk about every day. We have equations. We write equations that describe them. Well, what does that mean? We still don't know what it is. And I'll give you an example from your own lives. We don't know what love is. What's love? We feel it. Andreas loved Vivienne. But can he define what that is? What is love? And computers don't feel it. So there's a big distinction between us and AI. We feel things. Computers don't. We have to keep that in mind as we're overrun by the AI in coming years. But we don't know any of the fundamentals. We don't. We have to admit that we're ignorant. Specialists don't like that. The scientific establishment does not like to be told that it's ignorant. Now, I called my book A New Science of Heaven, and one reason why I call it A New Science of Heaven is that we need a new science. We have a very highly evolved physics, but it's only a physics of 0.1% of the universe, because it's all based on atoms. We need a very highly evolved plasma physics. It is being developed at the moment by some of the guys that I mentioned, but the fact is, not enough of them. Because nobody gives them enough money. The biophoton research has ended because nobody will fund the labs and the research. And nobody's really pushing at the edge to figure out all this stuff. about plasma because it doesn't fit the model, you see. Everybody's got fossilized brains in the scientific world. We have a physics that is not useful in the universe. It's only useful for the Earth. We can send rockets all around the solar system, and we can come within 6 inches of any target, hundreds of light years away. Well, not hundreds of light years away, but you know what I mean. The far side of the solar system, we can get a rocket to hit a meteorite or meteor. We can do all those kind of things. There I go again. And because we can do the equations, and we know about that. And so we think that's it, but that's not it. That's only useful for us. It's not useful for understanding the universe. The universe is full of plasma. And you know, the solar wind fills the solar system. But once you get to the edge of the solar system, and we've had 2 satellites go out beyond the boundaries now, they detected that the plasma is more dense outside. In other words, they've proved that the plasma between the stars is denser than the plasma that exists around the stars. Where is it coming from? It's everywhere. In other words, far from outer space being empty, the further away you get from the sun, the denser it gets. And the whole galaxy is full of dense plasma. And so plasma can exist in 3 forms. It can exist in the arc state, which is blazing like the sun. It can exist in the glow state, which is like glowing nebulae clouds that you see through telescopes. And it can be in the dark state, where you can't see it, like those 2 giant clouds in our own moon system. And so I would suggest that the dark matter that everybody talks about is plasma that's in the dark mode. As simple as that. Because we know it's there. But they haven't put 2 and 2 together. You see, you haven't got that. Now, if we want to understand anything about the universe that's valid for the universe, not just for our own immediate vicinity of the solar system, we have to have this new science. And we should be funding it. Nobody's funding it properly. And the plasma research that's going on now is all geared towards 2 things. How to have better weapons, kill people better. You know, that's terribly important, because they use plasma pinch effects to detonate hydrogen bombs and that kind of thing. That's terribly important. We've got to learn to kill more people. And then the other thing is for controlled fusion reactions to produce power. Well, that's a worthy objective. Whether it can ever really happen or not, I wouldn't say. But it's sucked up all the plasma physicists because they can get paid salaries to do that work. But nobody's doing the real research to understand the universe, and it impinges on us, because once you do that, then you can understand the ionosphere. You can come to the conclusion of what's really happening with the climate change. You factor that into the models. The models are all just based on carbon dioxide, and that's incomplete, you see? And we might be able to do something about the climate change if we understood plasma better. For instance, we might be able, as Vivienne brilliantly suggested, to use plasma somehow to stop the climate change. But how can we do that if we don't understand it enough? So that's it. That's the story. I'm very honored to be asked by Andreas to come here. He knows that Vivienne was reading this book. Well, basically, it was the last book she read. And, you know, I wish that she and I had been able to discuss it, but she never got to the point where she was ready, and now she's left us. But thank you, Andreas.
Thank you very much. Is there any questions? Yes, there's one.
This is a question slightly for everyone, so I apologise to you for being in the hot seat when I ask it. And I'd like to come back to what you said at the beginning about the importance of books and reading for giving us knowledge and perspective on how other people see things. And I completely agree with that, although I think I'm maybe slightly an anomaly in this room because I'm not an intellectual. In fact, I have the pleasure of saying I'm a 2-time university dropout. And the perspective that I have gained on the world has been through opening my eyes and opening my ears. And when I've done that, what I've been met with is just an intolerable amount of human suffering. In this country, we're seeing it. We're facing an appalling cost of living crisis, and we're seeing people being murdered, I think, quite frankly, by the state as they are forced to choose between heating and eating. We've seen parents starving themselves so that they can feed their children. And if we hop just across the pond in Europe, they're facing the worst drought in 500 years, and crops are failing, there's food shortages. And if we travel even further to Africa, particularly in the east of Africa, they're going through one of the worst droughts in recorded history, facing extreme famine. And Oxfam did a study recently that found that one person every 36 seconds dies in East Africa. You know, whilst we've been sitting here having this really intellectually stimulating conversation, children are starving to death, and people don't have access to water. And, you know, maybe this is slightly because a lot of this academic stuff slightly goes over my head. But you spoke about censorship earlier, and I wonder whether there comes a point where all of this intellectualizing is censoring action. And I'm not going to apologize for my friend Ramon's actions. He actually really didn't mean to interrupt, but I think where he's acting from is a place of emotionally connecting with the crisis we're facing, the climate crisis, and myself and Ramon have basically given our lives to fighting it in civil resistance. Ramon was right, I have been to prison. I'm 21, and I have 4 Crown Court cases against me. I'm facing a maximum, not that I expect to see this, but in pure legal terms, a maximum of 50 years in prison for my actions. And you've been saying IOU. I don't know if that's like an abbreviation for Intellectuals Unite, but I've been thinking about that statement, IO, and what we owe, us in this room, what we owe to every single other human and life form that we have the pleasure of sharing our home with. And I don't know if this conversation is what we owe. Like, I really appreciate what you're saying, and I appreciate the importance of the science, but I listened to it and I couldn't help thinking, I don't really care about the atomic bombs and what has started or contributed to this terrible climate crisis we are in. What I really care about is people and the effect it's having around the world, and as a 21-year-old, my generation, who are set to live through the worst effects, and there's people younger than me, and there's people being born today, and there's people being born every day who are going to see so much worse. And I'm taking the action that I do now as a 21-year-old and am risking my civil liberties every day because I believe I'm a member of the last generation who can really take action on this. And I suppose my question to you and actually to everybody in this room is, how do we make sure that the scientific research and the intellectual stuff that we're talking about and the academic basis, which is really important, how do we make sure that all of that doesn't censor action that will help people today who are living the worst realities of the climate crisis and the oppression by capitalism and the 1%, more than myself as a white, I'm non-binary but female presenting, and I was born extremely fortunate and middle class. Like, I'm not living the worst effects of it now. How do we make sure that these conversations, which are important, aren't stopping us from taking the action which really helps and can really change the lives of the people who are living the worst effects today and who are set to live the worst effects tomorrow and the next day and the next day, whilst we continue to faff about the real issue of the changes we need to make?
I think that your aims and instincts are noble, that you are desperate, and who could blame you? I don't know that exactly what you mean by the extreme things, but we don't need to know that. I'm sorry to hear that you're in trouble with the law and so on. It's obvious that your motives are very sincere. There are different ways to deal with emergencies, and one of them is to try to keep our heads, which is not easy. What we're doing here this evening is trying to understand some things that impinge on all those problems that you've mentioned. We can't all go out and glue ourselves to the M25. Nor do I think that it's really productive, because it merely alienates the public to do that, and it puts them off ecological concerns, which is easy to do because they would rather not have to think about it. So I don't want to condemn your actions in any way or say that I think that what you're doing is wrong. I understand your view. I understand why you're doing whatever it is that you're doing. And that's what your decision is, and who are we to condemn you for that? I think you would have understanding from everyone in this room. But I hope that we can also have your understanding for what we're trying to do, which is to have what you call an intellectual discussion. I wouldn't know I'm that much of an intellectual, but the thing is that we're trying to see all the stuff that's going on in the world in terms of science and physics and the earth and the atmosphere and all that, and understand it better. So you should be as kindly disposed towards us as I think we are to you.
I've got a question.
Hi, I'm Emma. Thank you so much for being here. I'm also not an intellectual, but I wanted to know if there's any connection or link between psychedelics and plasma. Because obviously there's a lot of research going into psychedelics now and how actually it can benefit many things, but yeah.
So I think not a direct one, because psychedelics are atoms working on atoms, and plasma would only have an indirect connection there. And I don't think anybody's looking into it because they don't pay enough attention to plasma. I don't think that there's any research going on that. It's a good question.
Okay. I just want to say thank you very much for your talk. this is the first time I'm hearing about plasma and the Earth and the outer layer of the Earth and all sorts. So, thank you. When Vivienne was alive, she was a woman of action, and hearing what you had to say tonight makes me think, okay, how can I take what you've said and put it into action? And as well as being a human being, I'm also black, shock horror. And being told you're an ethnic minority for so damn long is pretty tiring. But I realise that there's nothing minor about me. There's everything major about me, and that goes for everyone else in this room tonight. And how can we, as majors, go home and put into action what you've said? Is there particular websites that you recommend, or aside from your book, is there anything else that we could read to really open our eyes to what you've shared tonight?
First of all, I had to completely understand it myself. If I hadn't done that, I couldn't explain it to anybody else, could I? And I'm not a plasma physicist, you see. I may look like one. I can't make any suggestions at the moment. I just hope that everybody will press anywhere they can, ask questions of people. You meet a scientist, get them going on plasma. They'll try and brush you aside, and they say, oh, you don't understand. You're not one of us. But just push. I wish I could think of activist things to suggest.
That's a television documentary about it. That would be a start. Yeah.
Very good, a television documentary. Excellent. That's my wife, Olivia, by the way. She would star in it. She's the brains, I'm the brawn.
I wrote the book, you just helped me design the pages.
That's right, that's right.
Where can we get your book? Is it on Amazon or something? Or?
It's on Amazon, yes. It's called A New Science of Heaven. And you can get the audio as well. And it's an e-book, and it's even in paperback.
Amazing. Okay. Good evening, everyone. And also thank you for inviting me here. I came in and I got a little bit of what you were saying, which is very, very interesting. I work in also digital field and also with AI, and it's been so pressing on me, all of this stuff, just from a point of view of like education. Andres once said, only a fool goes around saying that he's wise. So it's nice to come here and get knowledge, because I feel like that's how we can go in the real world with knowledge and understanding to fight real battles. So I just want to say thanks for this as well. My journey towards this space, which is why I'm interested in you, is if you take a look at the night sky, a dark patch of the sky, it seems empty, it seems void, it seems nothing is there. But it only takes a different kind of lens for you to see there are stars and there are galaxies and there are billions of planets there. So, it's quite interesting about this cloud you were saying, because I also had this dream of a cloud, a great cloud outside of the earth, and it really, really frightened me, and then I woke up, and I thought I was going mad. And for the first time, I hear someone talking about this plasma, this kind of dark matter between the earth and the sun is very, very interesting. And I'd like to know more, because I feel like the more knowledge I have is the more I can be able to use these knowledge in my field, to make changes. So yeah, I'll definitely recommend you on that, and maybe, a little bit more on this cloud, this dark cloud plasma, because I feel it's very interesting. There's a lot of energy. And to tie to the lady what she was saying, which is psychedelics. So I've been wondering, could psychedelics and, let's say, the natural ability to pray, to meditate and harness that energy in a natural form, and psychedelic fast track you there, could we be speaking to the same thing? Could we be connecting to the same thing? Could my dream be connected to the same kind of energy, and what it could be? So yeah.
You see, you may have psychically picked up the existence of the cloud in the same way that I suggested that the ancient people did, the Marcosians who described it 2,500 years ago, or 2,000 years ago. So I believe that's possible for that to happen. And since you asked, I'll just say a little bit more about those clouds. I don't want to go on too long because I've already exceeded the time, but just to give you the idea that those giant clouds would have a fantastically complex internal structure. Basically, if a plasma entity the size of myself were standing beside me, its internal structure would be more complicated than my physical body's internal structure, which is already pretty complicated, as we know. So what would it consist of? It would have a lot of filaments for the electron currents to go along through filaments. It would have nodes. It would have voids. It's very important to have voids. There's a whole science of voids. I haven't got time to explain that one now. But between the things, and you see plasmoids are all surrounded by a skin, a sort of double membrane, similar to the cells in our bodies, which have double membranes. And they protect the interior of the plasmoid, which is a blob surrounded by skin. And so you can have two next to each other. One contains 10,000 degrees, and one contains minus 1,000 degrees. But they won't affect one another. They're isolated pouches. And so the storage capacity for information in a cloud 9 times the size of the Earth is approaching infinity from our point of view. They would know everything about everything that's happening here. They would have the entire history of the Earth in there because they're billions of years old, apparently. They've observed and recorded information about the entire history of the planet. The first life forms that came made of atoms, the first plants, the first fish, the first animals, the history of the human species, which is, after all, quite recent. And they know who you are. And they know where you live. So, but that's true of all of us. And we're talking about some big super intelligences here. We've got to get our heads around that. You're right to call attention to it. Now, I feel bad that I've neglected this woman.
Well, my question was just really on from what Phoebe was saying, that how can this thing, plasma, how can it help climate change? I know it's maybe a basic question, but I'd like to try and understand it. Try and, if it really can, we need to action. I don't know, we need to regroup. Obviously, the government's not understanding the urgency. There needs, I don't know, a force that we come together, and literally, start actioning, not necessarily protesting.
Pressure. It doesn't have to take the form of protest. Well, anybody who's a member of any political party here, I'm sure some of you are, push at the party meetings if you ever go to them. Write to your MP if you ever do that kind of thing, or if you run into anybody of influence, just push. Just keep pushing and say, what about plasma? They say, what do you mean? What's plasma? Well, tell them. And if you don't know, say, okay, read this book, because there's one book at least so far that explains it, and then you can go on from there. And Olivia's suggestion of television coverage would be good. Programs about this very point. Can plasma, an understanding of plasma, influence our understanding of an ability to control and deal with the climate change? Because we know it's part of it.
So it can, maybe.
Yeah, but we all have to push, you see. We have to get our energy out. We each have to sort of bring out our inner Vivienne.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm trying to understand how this plasma can.
We don't know. We need more research. Here's the chap.
First of all, I'd just like to say thank you very, very much. This has been absolutely captivating this evening. So thank you. Speaking of our inner Vivienne, I just thought this might be a good moment to recall something that Vivienne used to say, which was that when she did punk a long time ago, it was all attitude, they felt there was a need for action, but they had no ideas. We had no ideas at all. And when I first got to know Vivienne in the early 2000s, what she would say about that time was that she was 180 degrees away from where she used to be when she was a punk, because she realized that actually a revolution without ideas was worse than no revolution at all. Thinking very metaphysically about, you know, the simple questions like, you know, what is the universe? What is the nature of a thing? To me seems more of a pertinent question than ever before. So thank you very much indeed for your talk. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, I must stop that.
Yeah, maybe I should take over now. It's been a long evening. I never ever read any of these kind of books, scientific books, and it was beside the bedside. You know, I brought it home because Vivienne read it all last year, and once I've known that Robert will join us here, I started to read in it and got quite engaged with all Vivienne's notes in it. And I don't need to get into how Vivienne read and how hard she worked on it, and she really needed to understand every little syllable in it, you know. Anyway, I enjoy reading this book, so it's really interesting and means something. I can do something with it, and I can understand it. Anyway, going on about it, but I don't know about all of this. You know, she was so practical in everything she said and did, and she always wanted a solution here and now. And I've never really, I don't know if there are any solutions. Of course there should be, because what's the worth otherwise going on? But there's slightly something about where we are at the moment. There's something has been and hasn't been yet. So are we in something of which they call a transition? I have no idea, but I believe in things which are, at one point we talked about light and dark and, you know, I don't know. It's all quite, I don't want to be a philosopher here, but light should win over the dark or something like that. I leave it like that because I really, really don't want to get into that. I want to thank Becky from the gallery, Apolitical, for letting us have this place tonight. And both our speakers, thank you so much. We're gonna have Intellectuals Unite hopefully twice a year. So the next one, November, December, around that time. And I think it will be at the George Orwell Foundation. We are invited to do it there then. And we'll be in touch to let you know. Anyway, thank you so much for everybody coming. Really, thank you.